This is the terrible story I will tell on Halloween. I'm Jane, 21 years old, working for an auto garage in town. Just like every year, the streets, shops, and homes are filled with Halloween decorations. One morning while walking, I was attracted to a group of people gathering on the sidewalk. When we got closer to see, people were enjoying themselves, taking pictures with a mannequin hanging from a tree. The mannequin was female, wearing a white dress with lots of stains and long, scraggly brown hair, body covered in bruises. The face was pale with a haunting expression, her saucer eyes wide open, mouth wide open with bleeding stains. I and everyone there were amazed at such an uncanny and realistic mannequin. I also enjoy taking photos with the mannequin, then sharing it on social networks to immerse in the Halloween atmosphere. My photo quickly had a large amount of interactions. "Yo, it's really like that girl's hanging right behind you." Reading that comment from a friend, I laughed out loud. One evening, about 3 days later, I was on my way home from work, quite late because the shop was very busy that day. There was a group of people gathering on the street. I slowed down and realized that was the place where the famous mannequin was decorated. It was well known for its realistic details, I thought, until I saw a cop car parked nearby. Out of curiosity, I got out of the car to find out what's going on. Trying to squeeze through the scene before my eyes was so terrifying that I immediately felt nauseous. The mannequin had her flesh torn and skin dangling and was now crawling with maggots, and a terrible stench arose. Its face was also much paler and seemed to be puffing out. "Oh my God, that's a real person, not a Halloween decoration!" The people standing around started talking to each other. Immediately I shivered, a cold running down my spine. The police are blocking the scene and asking everyone to disperse to make it easier for the coroners to investigate. I returned home haunted by that woman's appearance. Looking back at the photo, I realized I was taking a photo with a hanging corpse. She was looking at me as if she knew I was looking at her through the phone. The creepy smile was full of blood. The eyes were full of pain and hatred. I was startled and zoomed in on the photo to look closely. That creepy smile has since disappeared. I hastily deleted the photo and tried to do chores around the house to not think about it anymore. But that whole evening, I was constantly haunted by a feeling of uneasiness that I don't know why is there. I went to my room early, trying to relieve my anxiety by playing games. After a while, I decided to go downstairs to get some snacks. As soon as I looked towards the door, I was startled and screamed loudly when I saw the silhouette of a woman wearing a white dress with long flowing hair at the door. "Are you all right?" It turned out to be my mother. My heart skipped a beat. I acted as if nothing happened. I told my mother it was okay, and I went to bed and covered myself with the blanket. I don't remember what time it was when I woke up. The feeling of something touching my hair and nose makes me uncomfortable. As I slowly opened my eyes, I saw a foot hovering right in front of me. I looked up. The hanging woman's body was looking at me with a rotten face and a bloody smile. I was so scared that I couldn't open my mouth or move. Suddenly, the body's head fell right in front of me. That smile and eyes right before my eyes. I jolted from my bed with all my strength, eyes still closed shut, screamed my lungs out. I ran down to the living room. The loud scream woke everyone in my home up. The whole night my parents were with me because I was so panicked. 2 days later, the town news reported on the incident that the decorative mannequin on the street was actually the corpse of a hanged woman. The girl's identity was discovered. Her name was Hannah, 20 years old. She was murdered by her vile, cruel, junkie boyfriend. After that, I was traumatized by girls with long hair wearing white clothes, especially white dresses. One evening, I worked overtime at the garage. At that time, around 11 a.m., a Toyota Camry entered the garage with its warning lights flashing continuously. I ran out to find the situation. Stepping out of the car was a girl with long hair, wearing a white dress that covered most of her legs. She didn't look at me, but was still bending down to get something from the car. I started to feel nervous. I asked her what help she needed. She said there was a problem with her car's brakes, causing her to almost have an accident, and she wanted me to check it for her. She stood up straight and looked at me, the face that I knew too well. She smiled and introduced herself as Hannah. My name is Ethan. I live alone in a small town in the southern United States. My work takes up a lot of time in a day. I have to leave the house at 8 a.m. and return at 7 p.m. The area around my house was quite empty until the last few months. A family of a young couple and their daughter moved in. They weren't very friendly, so I only greeted them briefly in some first meetings. When I came home from work in the evening, I saw a little girl sitting on the side of the road wearing thin clothes in the cold winter. After a few questions, I realized that the girl was the child of a young couple next door. The girl was about 5 years old, shivering, her eyes fixated on the ground. When she heard me ask, she just looked up, looked at me with innocent, puffy eyes, and did not answer. I was about to help her stand up, but suddenly her mother's scolding sound came from afar. She is Kate, about 35 years old, with a thin body and some bruises on her face. I greeted Kate in a friendly manner, but she ignored me. She roughly pulled her daughter into the house and scolded her repeatedly, causing her to cry in fear. That night while I was sleeping, the sound of the couple arguing and the loud cry of the neighbor's daughter woke me up. This wasn't the first night like that. Since they moved in, I was often bothered by loud arguments. I'm quite uncomfortable. It's been a long day of work, so I really want to rest. But it's a private matter of their family, so I'm not feeling comfortable about reminding them and instead choose to keep quiet. The frequency of the couple's arguments is increasing. They use harsh words and insult each other. Sometimes there is a mother's yelling at her daughter, followed by her loud crying. I feel sorry for her when she has to live in such an environment. A few days later, that house felt strangely quiet. They must have resolved their conflicts, I thought. Another evening, I came home later than usual. On the dirt road leading to the house, I saw Kate's daughter again. This time she dressed more warmly. The little girl no longer sat with her head down, holding a toy shovel and diligently digging down the dirt road. I approached her and gently asked her what she was doing here. Her face was much brighter. Her innocent voice answered me, "I dig graves to bury people." That innocent voice told me that I was following my mother's actions the previous evening. I looked towards the neighbor's house in fear. Kate's figure standing in the door startled me. Her eyes were sharp and a bit angry. Kate slowly approached, pulled her daughter's hand, and went into the house without saying a word. Early the next morning, I heard loud crying and a very strong banging on the door. Hurrying to open the door, I saw a little girl with messy hair and disheveled clothes crying loudly while pointing towards her house. A series of questions arose in my mind. Walking towards the house, I immediately felt a cold chill running down my spine. In the house's messy living room, Kate hanged herself, her body floating, her face pale. I felt like my body was frozen shut, so scared that I couldn't move. My mind went all blank, my ears were ringing. The girl's cry pulled me back to reality. Immediately, I smelled a terrible stench. Taking the girl back to my house, I quickly called the police. After investigation, the police concluded that Kate's death was due to her hanging herself. Even more horrifying, they discovered Kate's husband's body buried behind the garden. The body was determined to have been dead for about 5 days and was decomposing. Kate herself attacked and murdered her husband, and then she ended her own life. Kate's daughter fell asleep in my arms because she was tired. Looking at the poor girl, I felt sorry for her unhappy childhood and having to witness so many terrible things. The girl was taken to live with her aunt in rural California, 300 kilometers from her old home. I think her parents' married life is not happy. The bruises on Kate's body are most likely caused by her husband's violence. Kate only acted spontaneously when she murdered her husband due to the life of too much pain and repression she had endured in the past. I'm Michael, a high school student living in Ohio, USA. I was not your A-grade student, and to be frank, I hated studying. Going to school every morning is quite tiring for me. As usual, I sat on the school bus to school. I sat in the last row, trying to relax by listening to music. I paid little attention to my classmates sitting in the vehicle. At a pickup stop, I suddenly had a strange feeling in my body. It was very difficult to describe. I paid attention to my surroundings, sat up straight, and looked out the window. I looked towards the small house where the bus was stopping. That was Mark's house. I knew that house. Mark and I studied together since elementary school. Mark is a quiet guy. He's shy, always sits in one place and doesn't have many friends. Everyone at school is impressed with Mark because of his excellent academic achievements. I used to act very mean to Mark just to satisfy my growing ego. One time, I poured so much glue into Mark's school bag that the whole lesson Mark sat with his head down, not knowing what to do. Or another time, I lured Mark to the women's restroom and poured paint all over the floor, causing him to slip and fall in front of the girls. But seeing Mark helpless and embarrassed made me laugh out loud. Thinking back, I feel so guilty. Back to that school morning. The bus stopped for a while, but Mark was nowhere to be seen. Suddenly, a hand passed through the car window and waved for the driver to move without having to pick him up. It seems like it's Mark's dad. He's probably not feeling well today, I thought briefly. That day of studying was very long, a strange feeling of discomfort creeping up within me, and I didn't do well on the math test today. At the end of the day, I went home exhausted. The feeling of dread and nausea made me angry and grumpy, and I snapped with my parents' concerned questions. That night, I watched the local news channel, and what I heard shocked my parents and me to the core. Mark's entire family was killed by an intruder early this morning. I was speechless when I heard the news. A cold feeling ran down through my body. I returned to my room, falling into an unknown void. The clock on the table ticked the time regularly, but I still couldn't sleep, constantly thinking about the strangeness of this morning's events. Darkness covered the surroundings. I saw Mark's house ahead. Standing at the door was Mark, his face covered in blood and his eyes gloomy, like an invisible soul trying to make contact from another world. Mark stared at me. My body couldn't move. I was extremely scared. Mark came very close, raised his bloody hand to touch my face, neck, and shoulders. Suddenly, he laughed loudly. His eyes and smile were wild. I woke up, startled, and found myself lying in bed, sweating profusely. I panicked and opened my eyes wide, looking at everything around me to make sure everything that had just happened was a dream. I was in my room. The window in the room was open, causing a cold wind to rush in, making me shiver. Suddenly, there was laughter. I was startled to see Mark in the corner of the room. I was scared, mumbling in my throat. Surprised, right? Mark looked at me with crazy eyes, completely different from him every day. I slapped my face hard to make sure this wasn't a dream. Mark is still alive. He is right in front of me. Mark went to lock the door and walked towards me with a creepy smile. He slowly pulled out a knife and held it close to my neck to control me. Let me tell you a secret. The murderer who killed the whole family is me. Mark laughed happily. He was crazy. I'm so disgusted and tired of being controlled by my parents. They don't let me do anything but do homework. Yesterday I had to study until 3 a.m. Seeing their faces drove me crazy. I want them to sleep forever, so no one can control me anymore. Using the great knowledge I have from physics and chemistry, it was easy to bypass the police. Every word Mark said made my body cold. I was extremely panicked in front of a crazy man willing to do anything. You'll be next. Remember those pranks you did on me? Mark growled. The knife in Mark's hand moved closer to my neck. I could feel the sharp blade about to cut the skin of my neck. I trembled in fear. Mark laughed even more excitedly. Suddenly, there was a knock on the door and my mother's voice called out, "Michael, aren't you sleeping yet?" My name is John, 22 years old, working as an employee at a Domino store on the outskirts of town. Although the restaurant is small, it is quite busy, especially in the evening. One late night around 9:30 p.m., the restaurant only had 1 to 2 customers left. That night, I worked with a colleague named Mary. The bell rang, signaling that the store had customers. Mary was busy, so I went to the counter to continue. I quickly wiped my hands on my apron and ran out with a cheerful voice. But the weirdest thing was there was no one around. At first I thought it was child's pranks. I was about to turn around and go inside when suddenly a customer walked in. In front of me was a tall, thin man with a pale face and deep black eyes. He was wearing a long black coat, looking quite sloppy. I politely asked him what he needed. He ordered a large pizza with mushrooms and bell peppers on top. Nothing else. The strange thing was that he asked me to cut the pizza into equilateral triangles, each side exactly 13 centimeters long. I think he's probably quite picky about what he eats. Quickly making pizza according to the customer's request, I carefully measured and cut each pizza slice to exactly 13 centimeters. As I cut into the pizza, I felt cold air run down my spine. I looked up a bit startled. There was something strange about the man's silhouette on the wall, as if it was twisted and deformed. I gave him the pizza. He gave me a lot of change. He stared at me and gave me a scary smile. I shivered a bit when his hand touched mine. Looking down, I was startled to realize that there were no fingers in his hand, only sharp, fleshy tips. My body trembled, unable to move. I kept looking towards that man until he was gone. I still stood there without moving until Mary ran over and patted my shoulder. She asked why I was standing here, and I explained that I had just sold a large pizza to a strange man. Mary seemed surprised and told me that she didn't see any customers, nor did she see me selling any pizza. She said the store had been empty for a while. She was cleaning the kitchen and couldn't find me. To my surprise, I confirmed that I had indeed sold a large pizza topped with mushrooms and bell peppers to a man. I put my hand in front of Mary and said this is the amount the customer paid. Both Mary and I were startled when we saw a handful of soil full of insects in our hands. I panicked and threw that horrible thing to the ground. Insects crawled on the floor. Mary screamed in fear. Mary and I decided to check the store's security cameras to review the entire incident. However, I didn't see any customers entering the store. The whole thing was just me standing in front of the door talking to myself. Not believing what I saw, I checked the pizza cutting area again. But Mary and I were shocked when we saw a pile of soil full of insects on the kitchen table. I decided to report it to the police. It was absurd and ridiculous, but all the evidence I had was a handful of soil full of insects. Police discovered dirty footprints in front of the pizza shop that ended right at the right turn next to the store. The strange thing is that the distance between the steps is exactly 13 centimeters. After a period of investigation, the police did not find any trace or information related to the strange man or the horrifying event that Mary and I experienced. Mary and I quit our jobs right after that because we were so scared. After 2 months of quitting my job, the face of the man who bought the pizza that day still did not let me go. One morning I read an article that found the murderer of a construction worker 5 years ago. The poor worker was then 31 years old. He was pushed into the concrete mixer. His body was mixed with concrete and soil. His decomposing body was buried with the concrete and cement right under the foundation of the structure. I felt my heart sink when I read about the construction project of the pizza shop that I worked at 2 months ago. My wife and I have been married for 7 years. We live in a cozy home in a town near the sea. We happily welcome the birth of our daughter, Anya. She is 5 years old this year. Yesterday, my daughter attended the birthday party of a classmate, a boy named Penn. I took my daughter to her friend's house at 8 p.m. for a party. Penn's mother arranged to come pick up Anya around 10:30 because she wanted to organize a pretty grand party for their son. I'm quite comfortable in my child's extracurricular and social activities. Around 10 o'clock, I left home to pick up my daughter and returned quite late, around 11:20 p.m. As soon as I got the baby home, my wife put Anya to bed, and then she went to sleep, and I watched football in the living room and fell asleep. In my sleep, I heard my daughter whispering to me, "Daddy," then pulling my sleeve. I woke up and she asked, "Dad, guess how old I will be next month?" "I don't know," I replied, half awake. "Are you still not sleeping, baby?" Suddenly, she pulled out 2 fingers from her pocket and lifted them up. And then she added 4 more fingers. "I'm 6 years old, Dad." Her innocent voice made me laugh. I reached out and patted my daughter's head. But then, I immediately realized that something is very, very wrong and looked back. The 2 fingers my daughter was holding were human fingers, and to be more precise, these were the fingers of a child. Hastily snatching 2 fingers from my daughter, I squinted my trembling eyes to look carefully at the objects. After hearing and seeing everything, my wife panicked and burst into tears, holding our daughter tight. I tried calmly asking our daughter where she got those 2 fingers from. My daughter innocently said they were a gift from the clown at the party. We immediately called Penn's mother to ask about the activities and attendees at the party. She said that a clown came to perform and gave the children different gift boxes, but the gift box her son received was a few candies. My wife and I looked at each other in shock when we heard her say that. We immediately called the police and provided all the information and evidence for the investigation. The next 2 days, my husband and I asked for permission for a short leave, and we also asked to work from home to ensure her absolute safety. After investigating and testing DNA from 2 human fingers, the police revealed the identity of that unfortunate child. It was a boy, 1 year younger than my daughter, and his family reported him missing 2 days ago. It is known that after the boy went missing, the family received a blackmail call from a strange phone number. However, the amount of money was too large. The family did not have time to prepare. They only received one last message that their child had died and completely lost contact with the kidnapper. The search for the boy and the clown expanded and became more intense. A few days later, the body of the boy in distress was found in a remote area near the town, nearly 30 kilometers, but there was no trace of that clown. Checking all the video recordings and photos at Penn's birthday party, the image of that clown was very blurry. Penn's mother said that she and her husband both thought this was a surprise the other had for the children, so they were not on guard. The photos only captured parts of him, such as his arms, shoulders, and hair. With only such images, it is very difficult to confirm his identity and to hunt down the predator. My wife and I are more scared every time we think that the kidnapper has approached our daughter. He showed these 2 fingers to my daughter as a challenge to the police, as well as a chilling warning to my family. Surely that pervert has noticed my family and is still somewhere around here. I'm Elon. I'm a high school student in Houston, Texas. I'm an open-minded individual and quite enjoy extracurricular activities at school. One time, my class was informed that they would participate in a community service cleanup session at a local park. Even though I wasn't very excited, being able to run outside was better than having to sit and study, I thought. It was Sunday morning. We arrived at the park at 9 o'clock and were assigned areas to clean. This park has just been built in recent weeks, and there are still some areas in the finishing stages. Me, Anna, and Max were assigned to clean up an area with a very large rock. It was high above my head and placed in a small flower garden. I observed the rock and saw that it had a very strange shape. There's also a cross engraved on the stone, but it seems to be upside down. I told Anna and Max, but they didn't pay attention to what I said. I guess I'm no expert in landscaping, I muttered. Ignoring the stone's strange appearance, we started cleaning. Max and Anna picked grass in the flower garden, and I will plant a few new flowers. We do this while chatting about interesting stories at school. As it neared the end, I started to smell a terrible stench. It was really nauseating. Anna and Max also noticed that unpleasant smell. We went around the area we were responsible for to find out the source, but didn't find anything unusual. At the end of the labor session, all of us were told to regroup. My team has thoroughly checked the area we are in charge of, so we are confident that everything is clean. It was probably some dead mice somewhere else, and the wind brought in the stench. We told each other that and happily left. A few days later, we organized a picnic ourselves at the park we cleaned, this time with Ethan and Mary. Returning to the flower garden the other day, we were happy because the newly planted flower trees were lush. My friends and I spread out the carpet next to it, ate together, chatted, and took pictures. About 15 minutes later, it suddenly started to rain. We quickly packed up our things and ran to a nearby shack to shelter from the rain. Where we were standing outside the rock, a brown liquid began flowing out. The stench rose again. This time it was much worse. We were stunned to see that strange thing and looked at each other, confusing and scared. About 20 minutes later, the rain stopped. Me, Max, and Ethan came closer for a better look. Mary and Anna fearfully huddled in the shack. Even though I was scared, a feeling of curiosity was taking over me. Reaching out to brush a few flower plants next to the rock away, a feeling of dizziness immediately hits me. I saw human fingers crushed under the stone and they were decomposing. I scream out in fear, almost to a panic attack, crawled out to yell at my friends to quickly call the police. The police arrived and immediately searched the scene. Max and I stayed behind to give our statements to the police, while Ethan took Anna and Mary home first because they were so panicked. The police found out that there was a body crushed underneath and immediately sent the tow to move the stone away. Seeing the entire scene unfold, I was shocked to the core by the corpse underneath. The body was no longer in one piece. It was decomposing. The stench and sight was horrifying to witness. The police thanked Max and I for the cooperation, then told us to go home first. Maybe during construction the stone was placed in a different position and collapsed over the poor worker while he was inspecting the project. So my feeling about the stone's strange position is correct. The man's body was processed and returned to his family. That stone was later demolished by the park management board, and a flower garden was planted in its place. To this day, that scene still haunts me. Extracurriculars now brings me the dreads. I always imagined that I would discover another terrible thing around there.